environment and battling white supremacy in drum corps. So we have representatives from a DCI and a DCA corps here today, and they're going to be telling you about how their respective organizations work and kind of what's going on that front for them. So we're going to do a quick round of introductions. I've got some questions that Mason has come up with, and then you will have a 20-minute question period chance to ask questions later on. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat if you're watching on YouTube, or DM them to the Mason Twitter. Also, be sure to watch our Twitter for a live tweet of the event, where we will be having somebody kind of keep you updated in case you miss anything. And this will be available on YouTube afterwards for your viewing if you would like to watch it again later. So without further ado, let's get started with introductions. I am going to go what looks around the circle from me, I guess. So let's start with Mike.
Hey everybody, my name is Mike Scott. I'm the CEO at Bluecoats.
And then we've got Ricardo.
Hi, my name's Ricardo. Everybody calls me Rick. I'm on the brass staff of the Bluecoats, and I'm also a co-chair of our new Diversity and Inclusion Committee.
Awesome. We've got Genevieve.
Hi, I'm Genevieve Geisler, and I am the CFO and CEOO of Bluecoats.
We've got James.
Hey everybody, my name is James, and I'm the snare tech for Columbus Saints.
And we've also got LeBron. LeBron, you are muted.
First technical issue. My name is LeBron. I'm the director of the Columbus Saints. I'm also on staff with Drum Corps Associates, running social media and information technology.
Awesome. I love it. So the first question I have for the night is for the Bluecoats. So, oh, did we just have another join? We did. Hello, Marshall. Can I get you to very quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, Marshall Cheatham, founder of the Columbus Saints, Drum and Bugle Corps, as well as the Saints Drumline Incorporated. That's me pretty much.
Great. Thank you so much for coming. Really glad you made it. We just started, so you didn't miss anything.
Oh, sorry. Sorry for being late.
Don't worry about it. So the Bluecoats name, as far as we know, was chosen to honor Canton City police officers. So how do you talk about the more difficult part of your organization's history, contextualized by current events with current and former members in a way that acknowledges the Bluecoats' positionality as a drum corps founded in part through its connection with the police?
Well, I'll go first if you want, since I've been working here the longest. So
sure.
By far. So they're young. You know, that's an interesting, obviously it's an interesting question. We actually were started as a part of the Canton Police Boys Club in Canton, and that's the reason for the name. So it was actually an outreach program of the Canton Police, and it's sort of an interesting, for me, something to think about how I think community policing has probably changed in the United States. That, you know, it was actually a program started by the police to help get kids off the street, and it did have a lot more probably African American students at that time than it does now. Although it was very mixed. You know, Canton's a very mixed place, but it was actually started as a program to just take kids that didn't even know how to necessarily even play a horn or anything like that, but you know, they had boxing and they had band, so that's how it was started, and that was the reason for the name. Over time, you know, we really, even since I've been doing this since the early 2000s, there's really no association with that anymore. That's just kind of where the name came from. But I think that's you know, we're trying to kind of go back to that idea of reaching out to the Canton community and you know, people from the city of Canton, students, by our partnership with a program called Enrichment, which is actually almost very similar thing to what the Canton Police Boys Club was doing at the time. It is an after-school program. It has music, dance, a few other things, but a lot of it's heavily focused on a drum line that they have, and we do a lot of work with them as far as monetary things, instructors, that kind of stuff. But of course, instead of being funded by the police, it's funded by the city of Canton, the Canton City Schools, and our local arts organization. So to me, that dichotomy is what's the most poignant, like who's funding and starting that organization. I think it has a lot to say about the state of that kind of thing in the United States. So
Yeah, it's a little ironic, right, that the question is raised because, today we're sort of grappling with this intersection of, the history of racism in the United States and police brutality in that intersection. And then, a natural question then, of course, is, our organization is one that was, closely associated with the police. But I like that Genevieve mentioned that, it really is also illustrating just how different, the concept of police is in the community, and how ironic that, a big question about drum corps today is, are drum corps doing enough in their local community? Do drum corps still maintain that sort of heritage that the American drum corps tradition had for generations of being, a local community institution? And, there was the Canton Police Boys Club founding its own drum corps, just like so many other drum corps were founded in small towns. So it's interesting how, how that history has morphed into something different today, both the question of, police in our communities, but also the role of drum corps in our communities. So yeah, it's interesting to see how that has evolved. But today, like Genevieve mentioned, today our focus is, okay, what can we do now, that the Bluecoats isn't an arts education institution nationwide? What can we do to ensure that those resources are also being directed back sort of into the founding principle, and that's, community-based arts education. So it's a strange journey, to be sure, for an organization to kind of watch that. But yeah, it's definitely full circle from a mission delivery standpoint.
All right, so continuing with the theme of community and what communities you guys see yourselves as part of. So the next question is for the Columbus Saints. So Columbus Saints have been vocal about bridging the gap between HBCU ensembles and the rest of the marching arts world. How do you see your organization as part of the greater marching arts ecosystem, and what do you think other groups should be doing to bridge gaps? And it is also okay to take a hot second to think about it.
That's a loaded question.
You can feel free to be as spicy as you want on this show. I do this for free, so.
Loaded. Yeah, it has repercussions though. Sometimes.
So I don't necessarily. It's hard for me to say what other organizations should be doing, especially with if their mission is different. If your mission isn't focused on community education, then I don't necessarily know what I can tell you as far as that, because that's what our focus is. Our focus is also on just using music to build a bigger community overall. As Mr. Cheatham, he can tell you his background as a social worker in Chicago and Columbus. He's like literally a lot of the kids, they come from foster homes. They literally have nothing. We've had kids show up that, hadn't eaten, and we literally had to feed them before we put them on the bus and the van, So it's hard for me to say what another group should be doing, because honestly, like, unless their focus is on that and they have the resources for that, it's really hard to do that. We're blessed with the fact that our CEO is a social worker, that he can kind of, compute that. But, with that being said, I think collectively, we have to look at how the marching arts activity is growing, right? Like, so if we look at it purely as drum corps, drum corps, to be real, is kind of stagnant right now. Like, it's not really collectively growing. HBCU marching bands, HBCU community lines are exploding. They're everywhere, and they've been growing, and they've been growing, to the fact, like in our area, there's these massive programs that have 60, 70, 100, 120 kids, that have buildings, that have buses that are giant.
Wow.
And they literally have no interest in some part in being engaged in drum corps at all. And we're good friends with them. River City Drum Corps in Louisville. They run 3 drum lines. Like, they're part of the Kentucky Derby organization, but they have really no interest in doing anything outside of HBCU style, right?
Boom Squad right in Evansville.
Boom Squad in Evansville. Yeah. I got charter buses in a building, like. So I think it depends on how we look at it. Like, the marching arts world is huge right now. It's growing. It's growing. Drum corps, even, let's be real, drum corps globally is growing. Drum corps is exploding in the Philippines. It's exploding in Indonesia. Like, we just switched off of G Bugles and literally had corps in Philippines like, send us your horns, and we're like, what? Like, for real? They're like, yeah, like, and they're paying top, not like, really? Like, activity's growing over there. So I think it depends on how you look at it, right? So from our perspective, we're a community organization. We look at how we can invest in each individual member. That's a little bit more off the field, because we have some other resources for that, right? Like, we're tied into community centers. We're tied into charter schools. We rehearse in what would be considered low-income, working-class neighborhoods. We want people to see us. We want people to walk up on us and be like, hey, yo, how can I do this? And we've had great success with that. We had one young man, he was 11, and we're part of our Boys and Girls Club program. And we're like, this dude's got some chops. 4 years later, he's with us and he's playing in a snare drum line with people from, WGI World, one dude from the Madison Scouts. He's playing with them and he's 14. And we're like, never would have a chance otherwise because he couldn't afford to do it otherwise. But he's with us, and kind of gains that experience. I think the other thing, we have someone like James here who was with us when we were an HBCU style drum line, is 60, 70 kids in a drill team who then transitioned, was able to go to Talladega College Marching Band, which didn't exist until 10 years ago. Like Talladega's new. So, and he also participated with us when we were doing the sound support experience as well. So, he has the experience of kind of all of it. He's done all of it. And, we have a lot of young people like that are able to kind of get that experience. So I think to circle back really is just, I can't tell anyone else what they should do unless their focus is on community. But I also think that there is a valid benefit that comes from re-engaging the community, whether that be funding, whether that be visibility, whether that be just extra support outside of people that aren't necessarily in the drum corps space. And sometimes that can just be someone that's like, hey, I marched at Southern University. I don't know anything about drum corps, but y'all look cool. How can I help you? And that's how it works. Some people just walk up and be like, hey, I don't know anything about you guys, but I like your style. I like the marching. I see you're in the community. Hey, here's a check, or hey. So anyways.
Yeah, if you allow me to jump in too, I know I'm not with the Columbus Saints, guys. A great organization, and it's also great to hear, what the drum corps was started for and what the services that you guys offer. But I want to answer that question directly. I want to get a little frisky. What should DCI corps be doing? More. That's the answer.
Okay.
Just like James, I went to an HBCU. I'm a 2-time graduate of Norfolk State University in Virginia. I taught at an HBCU for 5 years. I was assistant and associate director at Prairie View A&M in Prairie View, Texas, right outside of Houston. And that was the job I had before I moved to UConn. I loved my job. I loved my students. I loved everything we offered. And when I got to the Bluecoats in 2014, one of the first things that at the time, Dave Glasgow was the corps director. I had opportunity to work with him on this exact thing you asked. We literally started HBCU scholarship at Bluecoats for this exact reason. And that year, all you guys that have seen the 2014 Bluecoats show, the Tilt show, at the beginning of the show, there's an African-American trumpet player standing right in. He was featured the whole show. He's one of my former students from Prairie View. He's now a graduate assistant here at UConn with me. That's the talent that are at that's the talent that's at these institutions.
Right.
But as Deron was saying, because drum corps has become such an elitist activity where you have to have $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 to be able to do this activity, it shuts it off from so many people that could make this activity better. And I mean, let's just be real here. The fact of the matter is it costs money to do what we do. You got to get buses up and down the road. You got to feed people. You have to buy uniforms, instruments, all these things. It's $1 million operations here. But, there are many different opportunities for DCI to do more if they put the effort in. And they are absolutely committed to doing so now. Like we've had different conversations. I'm sure Jen will want to, and Michael want to jump in too, but there's definitely fire that's been set, and the tragedy of the murder, assassination of George Floyd sparked not only an interest in the contributions of African Americans, which should have been a major issue in this country anyway, but now all these different facets of our country will say, okay, now it's time to invest in this group of people that help build the country. Like that's where we are. And that, to me, I think I agree that the question was loaded, but I think it's one of those things where it forced not only DCI, but people that may not even agree with what we're talking about to at least listen to the conversation. So the answer to your question, in my opinion, DCI needs to do more. United States needs to do more. We need to do more to educate one another and so forth.
I've got a million suggestions, but to be honest with you, this is not the platform to do that. That would be an offline conversation because, and I'm only saying that because I've lived the entire experience I don't know if I'm the oldest one here, but I kind of looking at the hairdo. But I started marching in the 70s from Chicago, Illinois, historically black drum and bugle corps, St. Andrews Hornets. The city of Chicago had at least 20 African American drum and bugle corps when I marched. The state fair in the state of Illinois had a prelims and finals show that lasted 2 days in the state of Illinois, where Pioneer, the Kilties, Suncoast Sound, Spirit of Atlanta came all the way to march at the Illinois State Fair because there were 35, 40 corps competing. Okay, now that's back in the 70s, 80s. Fast forward when DCI really got his legs up under him. If you look at the statistics of all the drum and bugle corps, and I'm bringing this from history as well because I'm on a committee that's doing historical stuff for the Drum Corps Museum. Drum corps went from probably 20,000 all over the country to what we have today. Now, how many corps are active on the field today in DCI?
It's a little bit over 40.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just over 40, I would say.
From 20,000. Now, that's not to say that everybody was at the Bluecoats level or the Cavies or whatever. However, there were Division I, Division II, Division III. You can get in where you fit in. If you couldn't fit in that, then you stayed a parade corps. So there's always been options for community organizations to grow in. In the current format, you got to have $1 million in the bank before you could even come to talk to them and a food truck. I'm going to leave it right there. I'm going to stop because that's where I'm going to end up getting in trouble because it can't grow because that model is unsustainable unless everybody's going to continue to pay $4,000, $5,000, and then eventually $6,000, $7,000 a year to sustain the model. So we really have to rethink the entire, in my opinion, the model. So I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna go on mute so that I will shut up. Okay.
I don't think you need to shut up. Those are such great points. I do agree that the national tour model is as like cool and fun as it is to like, you know, travel the whole country. It also does create a lot of barriers, which then need to be very purposefully addressed if you're going to be making your organization an inclusive place. And so I will direct us to the next question then, which is for the Bluecoats. So in your diversity and socioeconomic impact annual report, you outlined a lot of great initiatives and say that you, quote unquote, hope to inspire peers throughout the pageantry arts to do the same. So for example, you're planning to shift your scholarship model to be mostly endowed funds, including your HBCU scholarship. But Bluecoats is very lucky to be a big name with a lot of fans, a loyal alumni base, and a lot of resources. So do you have advice for groups without the same kinds of resources as the Bluecoats?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for reading the report. Our Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council put a lot of work into that, so thank you for reading the report. Yeah, you know, I think what Marshall just brought up and what Rick was alluding to, you know, talk about sort of where barriers are created because of the model or the infrastructure that we use, you know, for drum corps, and that shifted, because, you know, people saw an economic opportunity or a branding opportunity or sort of a scale opportunity, right? Like, let's take drum corps and make it big time, and that certainly has happened. You know, the students at the Bluecoats and the drum corps that do travel 10,000 miles, you know, they get in front of 200,000 people and they travel the country and they see all these states and they perform at an enormously high level, and we operate an enormously incredible amount of services with, you know, doctors and medical people and all of that, and that's all great. But that model also, on the flip side, has created barriers and has changed the constituency, the type of student that is impacted by drum corps programming, right? Now, you know, Rand, you alluded to how Bluecoats is, you know, sort of taking advantage of its resources to, redirect or to re-envision that. I guess to the question of, okay, well, Bluecoats has a certain amount of resources, so that's one thing for them, but what about everyone else? Well, I think the answer really does lie in sort of the next part of what Marshall was saying, and that is we have to look at the model, right? We have to look at opportunities to take a look at the individual missions of the organizations, the mission of Drum Corps International, the mission of any of these organizations that are providing performing arts education, and then see how we can add, amplify, change, redirect certain parts of the model, the system, to direct those mission programs to different audiences, right? So at Bluecoats, we're doing that a couple of ways. One, okay, let's look at the top act, the drum corps that we operate every year, what we're known for. Okay, well, how can we reduce barriers specifically so that people can enter that program without changing that program, but we can make it easier to access, okay? And in a long-term way, we think that one of those answers might be endowed scholarships, because we know that money is money that we can then rely on for generations. It can bring students in, right? Our Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council, a lot thanks to Rick's insight into his experiences in marching band before drum corps, can we create outreach programs that allow students to gain access to the skills that they don't develop that, we use. For instance, we march a certain way. Someone alluded to this earlier on the call. We march a certain way at Bluecoats. Well, that's not the right way or the wrong way, but students maybe they don't come and audition at Bluecoats because they haven't ever learned that. So, skills development. But then that's just the drum corps. Can our programs, whether it's Bluecoats, whether it's another organization in the world class at DCI, or whether it's community ground up organizations like Columbus Saints, how can we create programming that leverages what we know as performing arts institutions, leverages the tools we have, the staff, the curriculum, the whatever, and create programming that isn't the drum corps, that is something else, a community-based drum corps, a community-based drumline, educational resources, whatever those things are. One project that we've recently worked on is Bluecoats School of the Arts. That doesn't just reach our students, that any kid with an internet connection can reach Bluecoats School of the Arts programming. Genevieve alluded to an agency that we have a relationship here in Canton called Enrichment. It's a ground up community drumline, in addition to a whole bunch of other after school sort of latchkey style programming. But, what if every world-class drum corps organization found that equivalent agency in their community and, reached out a hand, provided resources, whatever those things are. There's opportunities for us to change the model, and also to change sort of to reduce those barriers to entry. Genevieve?
Yeah, I think also just to build on that, because I've been working for the Bluecoats for a long time, since we didn't have any money or a big brand really, so, and something that's interesting to me, even though this wasn't necessarily done intentionally, one thing the Bluecoats did that helped really set the foundation for our future success was start holding camps in regions outside our home region. And those were in-person camps. We first started off in Texas, and then we moved into doing it in California, and then we moved into doing it in Atlanta. For one thing, there's a lot of talent in those places that we're interested in tapping into, and we didn't necessarily have the name cachet at the time. Maybe someone from Texas was going to fly to try out for the Blue Devils in the year 2000, but I don't think they were going to fly to Canton to try out for the Bluecoats necessarily, right? So, that's something that we built on, and that kind of almost accidentally, to be honest, built our diversity as an organization, but at the same time, it strengthened us, and part of that strength came from the diversity of the regions that people were from, the different backgrounds that people were from, all types of racial, the ethnic, economic diversity that we wouldn't have found just continue to have our camps only in Canton. So I think about that as something that Rick and I have talked a lot about even before all of this, the way in which, it's not just doing this for the right, it's doing it because you think it's the right thing to do, but it's also because you're building a strong organization that finds, that speaks to all the people, all of your constituents, and builds your base and brand into a larger thing that can affect more people and that more people see themselves doing. And then, with the Bluecoats School of the Arts, I think that, I hope that we did it because of the pandemic, obviously, but, I want to build on that, and keep that pathway open, in future years, because you don't have to travel at all, essentially to try out for the Bluecoats now. And I think that, yes, there's still, of course, the expense involved later, but, that's a big barrier that we can help break down. Anybody in the world could utilize that pathway to attend instructional camps and receive instruction and get feedback and try out, and we have that in place now. And I hope that that's a way that we can build like a stronger Bluecoats that's more diverse, just through that electronic means. So I think that could really be part of, because one thing we've talked about a lot is how do we break down these barriers, but it's not just like, okay, we give a scholarship to some kid that's already made it. Like, how do we find people that aren't even trying out? And I think that that's something we could really utilize. I don't know, Rick, what do you think about that? But
No, I think it's well said, Jen. I think the part too that we discussed at Bluecoats is that it's not just a financial thing, like
right.
We want more people in the Corps because we just want more people in the Corps. We want great musicians, talent, and there we touched on it earlier in the call. It's like drum corps was more diverse in the 70s and 80s than it is now. Even though there's such a focus on diversity and inclusion in the activity, the fact of the matter is access is what it is. And LaRon said it earlier, I think, other corps would be, mistaken to assume that just because the kids from one of these schools, they don't have the money to do it. I think it's more so the fact if I turn on a video and the only thing I hear is Shostakovich every year, if I'm, I want to do something that's a little bit different, I want to do something. And I think that's part of the appeal of the Bluecoats is that we have not been ashamed to go out and say, one year we're going to play the music of Tiande Braxton, and then the next year we're going to go out and play the Beatles, like
right,
or
right.
a Billie Holiday or jazz or the Great Creep. Like we've done so many different things to reach people where they are, and I think LaRon was absolutely correct about that. To attract the diversity, and that we're trying to do. We started very small. Yeah, we said, okay, instead of trying to attack every single diversity issue there is, let's pick 5 things and let's focus all of our energy into those. And then we'll move on to another 5 things in there. And Mike has always talked about not just creating an environment that is not racist, but being an anti-racist, having an anti-racist environment. We don't want that anywhere in the organization. So, we've absolutely set up a platform where people can express what they feel, but also being like the group that spurs this thing in DCI and maybe even in the marching arts in general, that pushes to get more people from diverse backgrounds.
Well, and I think to get back to your original question, that's some of these policies, creating the policies is free. So if you're getting back to the question about money or how to spread this to other people, it's some of the anti-racist specifically policy or anti-discrimination policy we came out with. I mean, that's free. And, allowing more people to access the information you're already putting online is either free or makes you money. So, I mean, there are some things that don't necessarily, the scholarships and the money and the branding, sure, but some of the things are free or even profitable.
Well, and conversations too, conversations like this one or within your own organization, those conversations are free. The Columbus Saints, you guys were founded with a specific community, orientation in mind. There are organizations where that, isn't true. They can have those conversations and sort of find those paths and then maybe reimagine their mission, whereas if their mission, if they are not translating their mission in a community-based way, they can do that, and that just happens to be a conversation, which is free, why we were excited to participate in the town hall is because having these conversations publicly also helps inspire people to do the same, so that's valuable for sure. And obviously we're hearing from all different types of viewpoints too today, so that's another thing. We're hearing from the Bluecoats organization, Randy pointed this out, which is a world-class institution that is demonstrating where all these barriers exist. And then we're hearing from an organization where, their very purpose is to make sure that these barriers don't exist, that they're reaching into their community. So that's also valuable, hearing from that spectrum.
One of the main barriers that we're running into as being Saints is not having the name recognition, which is cool. That doesn't bother us. What bothers us is people with that, I don't think I can do it. I don't think drum corps is too hard. It's the activity, they work too hard. You guys practice all day. Well, but I just honestly think that, like here in the Columbus, I can only speak for Columbus, but I'm sure it's going on in other places. The public school band system is non-existent. I mean, I've watched football games go from, schools that have maybe 30, 40, 50, 60 kids. We went to a band competition, what was it, last year before last? There was groups out there that had 6 drummers, 5 dancers, and that was it. And I'm like, where's the interest? What we're trying to do is reignite the musicianship. People think that it's hard to play a musical instrument. Well, it is. It's going to require some discipline. But in order for you to get to the point where you can actually play it, you have to be exposed to it. So we're kind of trying to go into, the schools. We started a community drum line. Well, the school already had a drum line. They needed an instructor, so James and I went over to help out. And in a matter of just a couple of weeks, we had 30 kids playing drums. Literally every drum they had was in the air. And there's another drum line in the city of Columbus that's got 70 kids. But there's no kind of like coordination. There's no, had we not got together, we wouldn't have known they were there. They wouldn't have known we were there. So
I think the other thing that we do also is we, from at least the grassroots perspective, we try to identify the local area. So like Ohio is a good example, right? So Ohio, we have the Ohio Music Education Association, right? We have state band finals. There are 0 bands from our large districts in Ohio that actually participate, right? 0 from Cleveland, 0 from Dayton. I'm talking about the actual city schools, not the suburbs, right? So we're like, well, wait a second, what's going on, guys? Like, why aren't you there? Like, and they tell us, well, I don't have any staff. So what we do, like, well, how about we just send 4 people down to your band camp? So we'll send some of our alumni down for free, and they'll work the band camp for a week. Or we're like, hey, like, why don't you need something? Well, we have extra stuff. Why don't we just donate it to you? So, we donate uniforms. Like, we do stuff like that because, for us, like, we obviously we don't have the name recognition, but I think the other part of it is that we also have to break down that barrier of, okay, it seems like it's too hard. I don't like the style. The music you guys play is bonk. Like, I don't really like it. And we need to attack it on all fronts at the bottom. And then the other component is we need to funnel them to the next step. And what that next step could be, it could be Talladega, like James. It could be Central State here, our HBC in Ohio. We have so many Saints that are at Central State. We have so many that are in the marching band. And like that was their opportunity to get more. We have so many that are on Ohio State at OU that just come through for a couple years and they get that little confidence boost, And I think the other thing that really especially from what Mike and Genevieve and the Bluecoats were generally talking about was like, it's that community engagement. Like there definitely are things that can be done at the base level that literally are minor for us that are like life-changing for a lot of these schools, and a lot of these community programs. And it could be literally something as, hey, I got this 20-year-old snare drum in my closet. I got these old drums that we donated to the community center. And they're just like, oh, wow. Let me send somebody down there for 2 weeks to hook you guys up. Oh, wow. Like it's little stuff like that I think can kind of change and bridge that gap because you never know what that kid's going to do afterwards, right?
Yeah.
It's a really good point about how sometimes we like automatically undervalue what is just here, and our organizations are just able to give. We after we launched Bluecoats School of the Arts, it's relatively inexpensive to deliver online content, right? It's there and it's online, and so we said, hey, we could give a code to every student at Canton City Schools. And then they can use all School of the Arts for free. And we did the same for enrichment. So, we called up Canton City School District and said, hey, we're going to call this Learning Access. We'll, please put us in touch with your teachers. We'll give you a code, any student in Canton City Schools, any student in enrichment can, use anything on Bluecoats School of the Arts for free. And to them, it was like, oh my gosh, how are you doing that? That's incredible. Oh my gosh, that's so great. For us, it was like, no, it's easy. It's already there. Why, let's just give it back to our community. You can't do that necessarily with, in person, right? Like once you do something physical, it starts to cost money, but we all now, because of the pandemic, are putting so much of our curriculum online, putting so much of our resources in a way that's, more inexpensive to deliver, and it can be delivered at scale, so yeah, that's a good that's a really good point, Laurent. And that it's something relatively minor for us. We just started it, but I hope that who knows, in 30 years, maybe it's something that hundreds of students will have taken advantage of. It's hard to tell now, but it was not difficult entirely, for us to do it.
Mm-hmm. All right, this has been an amazing conversation. I just want to briefly remind everybody who is watching the stream that if you would like to ask questions, please remember to drop them in the chat or DM them to us on Twitter, because the question period will be starting in about 4 minutes, or basically whenever people have wrapped up answering this next question I'm about to ask everybody. So the next question I'm about to ask is, so having both your organizations is a super interesting contrast in kind of how organizations can work. So Bluecoats, being a DCI world-class core, recognize those barriers to entry and is now taking the time to put care and effort into addressing them. But Columbus Saints obviously chose to eliminate a lot of those barriers by competing in DCA instead of DCI and doing a lot more purposeful community engagement. I'd really be interested to hear from both groups on how you see the future of drum corps as a whole as shaped by the actions of organizations like yours and inactions of others.
I guess I'll jump in there. And James, I want to ask you too, because I think my answer goes to what your experience as well. DCI has always fed off the creative juices of other styles. From, you watch DCI in the 70s, DCI in the 70s looks just like HBCU band. You get into the 90s and into the 2000s, BOA really started to become popular, and so you started to see a lot more of that BOA style show in DCI, from the use of props, shout out to Bluecoats, to other facets of what we do.
Yeah.
And my answer goes here. I'm starting to see a lot more of the HBCU influence starting to create, like where I said, get itself right back into DCI, from choice of music. There was so many years where you would turn a DCI program on and you would hear just as much Earth, Wind, and Fire as you would hear that classical music. And now we have Kendrick Lamar winning Pulitzer Prizes. I think the future of DCI looks more inclusive. I think you're going to start seeing corps that aren't afraid to do hip hop music. We've already got past the point where we're not scared to do rock and roll music. We do jazz. I think hip hop's going to work its way into DCI. And the part I wanted to ask you, James, is like the membership of DCI. I think when the music changes, you'll start to see more HBCU involvement, as well as outreach from DCI saying, hey, there is a place for you. And that, that's why I want to ask, like, going to Talladega, are there people that say, hey, I want to march DCI, man, you did that, I want to do it too?
I can probably say there were very few students that marched DCI or came from a core school. But going to Talladega, it was completely different. They eliminated the harnesses. You were on straps, leg rests. You used the Moeller technique. So it was like you were changing your whole entire aspect of playing to be a part of the organization. Really, there wasn't a lot of talk about cores or, previous experiences with that. It was like if you came from a SWAC style or an HBCU style and you stuck with that and you came in there showing how to play that, like that's just what it was. You were automatically taking 10 steps higher. I mean, I gotta be real. But I guess my mindset was before I went to Talladega, I was in a lot of different organizations. Even if I didn't plan on actually making it or whatever the situation was, I grabbed a little bit of something out of every one of them. Say like, hey, okay, I have the ability to do this. OSU, I went to a few of their band camps. Had no desire of actually being in the marching band per se, but I knew how to march that style a little bit. So it's like, I like to have a lot of, be very diverse and just what groups out there are requiring, really.
For me, Genevieve sort of talked about the cycle of the Bluecoats organization, where we started fundamentally as a community outreach organization. I mean, it was a parade drum and bugle corps that was founded in Canton for kids in Canton. And now we see, almost 50 years, it'll be 50 years in 2022. We see 50 years later, a world-class institution that has, as far as the drum corps is concerned, very few connections with its community. I think something that excites me about seeing, opportunities that we have to change the organization, to make the organization more inclusive, is by sort of following that cycle all the way around back until we are making investments that we can be proud of in our community. On the one hand, right? Like, how can we connect with the Canton community? The Canton community that's naturally going to reach a student of a socioeconomic status or a predominantly different racial or ethnic background. We're going to meet those students where they are right here in Canton, and sort of the fundamental original element of our mission. And at the same time, we can be looking at those same, that same model of opening the drum corps itself, reducing those barriers. And one of the great things about that cycle is, while, maybe, you could argue that we've strayed away from sort of some of the original things that made drum corps great, at the same time, Bluecoats organization has so many wonderful things that it can bring back into the community because of this, status that it has achieved from a worldwide, performing arts brand. So if there's a silver lining in that sort of realignment of our mission, it's that we now have all these wonderful things that we can bring into our community. We have Tony Award winning and Emmy Award winning designers, and we have incredible skills from around the world, and we have people that have made their life teaching young people, and from all over the world. We have people that have backgrounds in certain techniques and other techniques. We have a choreographer who lives in Hawaii and a world-class trumpet player who lives in England, and we have Rick, who's about to have his doctorate and be a conductor and a professor for a living, and we can bring those wonderful things and channel them back into the community. The key is that that's an opportunity that we all have to realize we should start taking advantage of now, right? Like, we've had an opportunity to reframe that, and now we have to realize, oh, okay, let's continue to extol the wonders of drum corps at a world-class touring level, but let's also redirect those wonderful things into our communities or into populations that we are refusing, really, by not doing anything to benefit. We're making a conscious, Genevieve says this all the time, by not doing something, we're choosing to not do that, right? So we're refusing in a way to redirect those resources. And it can be both. I think there's a fear that comes naturally, right? Like, that's really how we reach so many of these moments of inequity in our country, is there's a fear of letting go of those things, right? I have all these wonderful riches. I'm not going to give them to someone else. But that's kind of a false conundrum, right? Like, that doesn't necessarily exist. So if I have a vision for that, it's that, right? It's kind of following that cycle all the way back until all of these wonderful organizations are redirecting those resources in a way that's more equitable.
And I think in particular for the Bluecoats, we started, like we talked about in the very beginning of this conversation, as an outreach program of the Canton Police Boys Club. But, we found a way to last a lot longer than they did. But there necessarily isn't someone serving that mission anymore either. So, maybe it's incumbent upon us to keep working on ways that we can come full circle to our roots and start to do that, because that's not something that even exists anymore. And I'm so glad we found a way to, continue on, obviously, but that's something that we should really think about, and not, regardless of the broader drum corps community, just in our own history.
So I do have a question from the audience, and that is, can anyone here conceptualize the goals outlined thus far in a way that affects all participants, so that's staff, volunteers, alumni, fans, etc.? And this question is from Michael Shannon.
Well, I know one thing we're working on through InStep with DCI is DCI has always, created a platform where people can express themselves freely. So from an African American's perspective, I'll just start there. With the murder of George Floyd, there was a lot of attention, countrywide on what was going on with our community. And I was fortunate enough to be along with a lot of other members that have marched DCI in the past that are African Americans. We started an organization called Our Marching Counts. And Our Marching Counts was absolutely started to not only bring attention to what was happening in the past and the present in DCI, but also create a platform for leadership and participation moving into the future for people that look like us. I came from a privileged community. You know, my parents worked their butts off, but you know, we came from, you know, a lower socioeconomic community. And I know for a fact that I was lucky to have been able to march drum corps. It really helped me, you know, solidify what I would do for a living and so forth. So that's the, you know, and it was because I looked at people like Frank Williams, who was one of the only, I think one of the only Black caption heads in DCI history. I was looking at that. In 1998, I always tell the story. The first group I saw that made me want to march drum corps was the Bluecoats. Bluecoats had an African-American trumpet soloist on the front sideline, and him reaching back. I went over to the Bluecoats truck. I played a soprano and all. I had my own mouthpiece, but I played the soprano and all, and I was like, man, I want to do this. So creating DCI has, you know, in conjunction with InStep and DCI, we've come together and said, okay, how can we not only affect the lives of, you know, women in a positive way in this activity, or people of different sexual orientations in the activity, but also put a bigger focus on the contributions and the future membership of African Americans in the activity. And I think, you know, that also answers your last question. What does the future of DCI look like? It looks all inclusive. You'll be able to go to a drum corps and see a Black brass caption head, gay / or trans percussion caption head, you know, whoever running a drum corps, you know, different people from different communities having representation in the activity. And I think that not only affects the lives of us as African Americans, which was the overall focus of our marching camp, but also the community in general.
Would anybody from Columbus Saints like to add to that?
Sure. So, you know, I think the future of the activity, it really depends on what the future looks like. Because as we know, with the current pandemic, it may not be what it was before, right? So with that being said, you know, our experience as a DCA corps that also has the privilege to compete in DCI all age, we kind of get a little bit of both worlds, right? We don't get to necessarily go to championships for DCI, but we do get to go to DCI shows. The Bluecoats have had us at their show previously, you know, a great experience for us as well. DCA, the biggest difference and where we kind of side with the future of the activity in that space is the low entry fee, the low cost to even start a corps. One of our decisions, and we did actually, you know, I have to be upfront, like we actually did apply for DCI Open Class and we didn't get it. And we learned from that, and from that learning we took, and it came down to, are we going to charge $1,200 or are we going to charge $600? And we made the decision that $600 means more people can participate. So we basically went to a circuit that lowered the barrier for us. There's challenges that come with that. Like, you know, anyone that's seen our program, like we don't have a lot of money. Sometimes we're scraping 2 pennies together, you know, to make it work.
Yeah.
But we're genuine in what we do. We're genuine in the investment that we give to people. And just like any other corps, we want to have a great product. But, you know, with that being said, like the future for drum corps, I think it needs to be about adaptability and flexibility. There's enough space. As you can see in Ohio, there's 3 DCA corps in Ohio. There's 1 DCI corps in Ohio. There's enough space for the activity to exist easily. You know, Atlanta's another example. At one time, there were 2 DCA corps in Atlanta and 1 DCI corps. You know, so there's space for everyone. I think the key thing comes down to, from a future perspective, is what fits within your budget, and then also educating people more about those opportunities, right? From a diversity perspective, I think DCA probably has it easier when it comes to diversity because of their location. They're East Coast, they're in New York City, they're New Jersey. So there's a lot more Latino, there's a lot more African American. Even, you know, when the Renegades were out in California, there were a lot more Asian Americans. It was a little bit easier because they were like right in the middle of the communities, rehearsing at the public parks. So it's easier to have people walk up on them, right? The experience is also very different too. So for us, I think in general, and I think also for the future activity, it really comes down to what works for your program, but also just looking at ways you can better kind of eliminate whatever barriers are there. You know, I think the key thing also is that, at least for us, is we have to look at how we impact school programs one of the things that we noticed when we slid over to DCA was that the whole band camp issue, which was a huge issue, DCI finals basically falls flat in the middle of multiple HBCU, multiple college band camps. It was like, yeah, it ain't happening. Like, you know, we have people from Ohio State that literally would finish and then have to drive off the field to get back to Ohio State in time. You know, like, I think the future really is more about seeing how we can build that culture throughout the marching arts, and then also finding out what other barriers we can remove. And I think the big one will be financial going forward, reducing that financial cost and making it easier to participate really is going to be the key thing, in my opinion.
Absolutely. So I do have another audience question. This one is specifically for the Bluecoats, and they said kind of specifically for Mike. So this is from Travis Higgins, and Travis says, would the Corps be interested in having camps and shows at HBCU schools in order to generate interest and perhaps work with incoming Black marchers?
Hey, Travis, how's it going? That's a great question.
Rick might be the one to answer because he's working.
Yeah, Rick might be the one to answer, but that is, you know, Rick mentioned, you know, when we first kind of assembled the Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council, we said, okay, let's just work on 5 things right now, and then let's, after that, like, work on sort of broader action plan, you know, so like what's the triage and then what's the long-term plan. And so we're in the midst of the triage, and we've sort of accomplished some of those initial things. And then now we're going to be looking towards a long-term plan. One of the first things that we put on that list, and it was really thanks to Rick's suggestion. So Rick, I'll let you expand on your vision for this, but it was, what does an HBCU outreach program look like? You know, and now we're talking about breaking down barriers to entry for the Drum Corps program, not for community-oriented, you know, programming, but at the Drum Corps, you know, if there are students that want to do this, you know, what do those things look like? Is it making people aware of scholarships that are available? Is it making people aware of skills development that's available so that someone who's an incredible trumpet player but has only ever marched one style can, you know, learn? Like, what do those things look like? Now, the pandemic has meant that we haven't like really looked into those things too deeply, like operating them, but there's a really interesting connection to Canton, and that's every year there's an HBCU invitational here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, hosted by the Hall of Fame. So, you know, I've reached out to them about, at the very least, like, can we put a tent up at the Drumline event? Can we put a tent up at the stadium? Can we have representatives from Bluecoats, you know, there just to meet people? Or, you know, can we have some performers come and, you know, just try to kind of align the communities in a way? But when you start talking about, can the Bluecoats go perform somewhere? Well, then you're kind of talking about what Ron was highlighting, and that's, you know, there are some difficulties when it comes to the financial model or opportunities or the restrictions of the national tour that make things like that difficult. You know, like, if someone, I get emails, you know, hey, can the Bluecoats come perform at this? Or, you know, sure, like, it's going to cost me $150,000, and that's not even you know, like, I can't just assemble the Drum Corps, you know, and people, you know, that's difficult. You know, you used to be able to do that. Hey, everybody show up, we're going to go to this parade, you know, and that's just not how it works anymore. So those are difficulties that exist in sort of trying to redirect who gets to see Drum Corps and interact with it. But anyway, Rick, I don't know if you have more sort of an outline of your vision for the outreach program.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's from my own experiences. When I was at Prairie View A&M, we were absolutely committed to musicianship. You know, we wanted the best musicians. We didn't want the best SWAC member or best HBCU member or whatever. We wanted the best musicians. And part of that comes from just having directorship that believes in the vision of, you know, what's being presented by DCI. So every year we would take about 150 we used to have between 100 and 150 freshmen each year. And each year we would take them, sit them right on the 50-yard line and like, hey, this is Drum Corps. Because I think a lot of it too is you know, it's a mistake to assume that everybody even knows what Drum Corps is. You know, there's a lot of people that are not exposed to this activity. The only reason I was exposed to it, you know, coming from the community that I was from, is from an old 1970s racist law that was still in place in Virginia, where they would bus us to the other side of town to go to school. And I went to a core style high school, and my core style and the band director at the school introduced me to the activity. So I'm like, you know, this activity gave me so much. I wanted to have students that had that same experience that I did. And then not only that, you know, being able to be well-rounded. You know, if you go to an HBC school, like, you know, I can't remember who said it, but if you're only taught one style, might have been right. If you only know one style, you know, we were like, okay, we want students that have talent, but they may be insufficient in marching. So with the Blue Coat School, we can offer a position, you know, where it says, okay, this kid may not have ever marched corps style before, but man, he can play the loudest double G I ever heard in my life. So we want that kid in Blue Coats, and we'll teach him to do what we need him to do.
Excuse me.
You know, and I think access is important. I think having directorship HBCUs that are willing to put the investment in to bring these people in. You know, I think there's many different facets of this that play into Travis's conversation. And Travis, that guy Smith. Yeah, Travis, he's an old blue coat too. So he's the guy I was talking about earlier. So.
Oh yeah.
All right, so unfortunately it is 8:56 p.m., so I would like to shift more into the wrapping up of this event. I would like to say that we did not get to all of the audience questions. However, I will be sending audience questions to both these respective organizations through email afterwards so that they can still provide answers, which we will then be sharing on our social media. So don't worry, your questions will get answered, just unfortunately not live. Okay, what else should we say? We've only got a couple minutes left, so I would like to give both organizations just a very quick chance to leave everybody with one very small parting remark or thing to think about when they're engaging in anti-white supremacy. Sorry, I'm like waving around a razor because I like to play with my hands. I'm so sorry. I didn't even notice. I thought it was a pen.
Does she have a razor in her hand?
It's prison rules, Marshall. You know, listen.
What did he say? What did he say?
I'm sorry. I just like picked up anything on my desk to like wave around in my hands while I'm talking. Thank you to someone in the Mason Slack for saying that. Anyway, if people want to get to their parting remarks, that would be totally rad.
Well, I would just say on the Blue Coats thing, I'm glad you mentioned that you'll follow up with questions, you know, and we're happy to answer those. And really anyone in the community that wants to ever ask us a question, they can reach out to us, you know, on our website and ask questions, and we'll respond to those absolutely. And, you know, Rand, you alluded earlier to our the diversity and socioeconomic impact report that we recently came out with. You know, we worked hard at the end of that report to kind of outline our vision in a way, and at the very least, like what's on our plate right now while tackling these issues. And of course, you know, there's a long way to go. And the Blue Coats, you know, we're certainly not pretending to be professing the right way to do it, and we're not pretending to be anywhere close to the solution. You know, especially at the top, the top of Drum Corps International. But anyway, you know, we're going to try our best to be transparent and open as we do those projects, and we'll answer questions as they come in. And you know, we're grateful to have conversations like this for sure. So thank you for having us.
And I do hope that all of our work in this type of town hall does at least inspire other groups to intentionally at least think about and work on these, you know, topics.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for having us. I think I talked enough, but no, I just say thank you. And just guys, you know, if you're interested in, you know, trying to help and stuff, like Mike said, we're always open. We are looking for other African Americans that did march in DCI with our marching count. So if you have any, you know, looking for stories, looking for things, ways you can help, that is also a resource, as well as DCI in step, which Genevieve coordinates. So like I said, we're just looking for more inclusion and diversity in leadership and participation in the organization. So thank you.
All right, and anybody from, it's about to cut off, so anybody from Columbus Saints like to leave us with a parting remark?
So our founder and CEO, Marshall Cheatham, he instilled this value in us that a rising tide lifts all boats. So we believe that investing at the ground level raises everyone up to the next level. And that's what our organization is about. Regardless of who you are, what your background, what your religion is, what your gender, what your orientation is, everyone is welcome in our program. And we always work to invest in every single person that's there, not just on the field, but also off the field. Sometimes that can be, I need somebody to talk to today. Can you help me out? You know, like we look at it from a real local perspective. And so as we have these conversations and look to the future, you know, look to your brother and sister and ask how you can help lift them up as well. That's what we have to say. So.
Well, absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Sorry, I waved a literal whizzer around while I was playing with my hands. I really hope to be able to speak to you guys again in the future. I hope that our organizations can stay in contact because this has been totally rad. And I hope everybody watching got something nifty to think about today. So feel free to reach out to any of us online. We'd love to answer your questions. And we'll see you next month when we do another town hall. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.